The champagne flute slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of our family estate. 24 hours after receiving my MBA with highest honors, I sat frozen in the mahogany-paneled study while my parents calmly explained why I needed to transfer my entire inheritance to my younger sister, Madison. Their voices felt distant, clinical, as they outlined how my selfish academic pursuits had disappointed the family. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade could. Everything I believed about blood loyalty crumbled in that moment. But before we dive into this twisted family saga, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and if this story hooks you like it hooked me to fight back, smash that like button and subscribe because what happened next will blow your mind. Trust me, this family meeting was just the beginning of the most epic revenge story you have ever heard. My name is Scarlett Morrison, and until that devastating evening, I believed my parents, James and Patricia Morrison, were successful real estate moguls who built their empire through hard work and integrity. Growing up in our sprawling Connecticut mansion, I watched them mentor other families, donate to charities, and present themselves as pillars of our community. They funded my Ivy League education without question, praising my academic achievements and encouraging my dreams of joining their business empire. Madison, 3 years younger than my 25 years, had always been the family favorite. While I buried myself in finance textbooks and business strategy courses, she floated through life with minimal effort, dropping out of 2 different colleges and spending her days shopping or traveling with friends. Our parents never criticized her choices, instead calling her free-spirited and artistically inclined. I foolishly believed their different treatment stemmed from birth order dynamics rather than something far more sinister. The family meeting began innocently enough. Dad poured his signature whiskey while Mom arranged legal documents on the antique desk that had belonged to my grandfather. Madison lounged in the leather armchair, scrolling through her phone with practiced indifference. I assumed they wanted to discuss my post-graduation plans or perhaps offer me an executive position in Morrison Properties. Instead, Dad cleared his throat and announced that circumstances required immediate adjustments to our family inheritance structure. He explained that my recent behavior had forced them to reconsider their estate planning. Confused, I asked what behavior he meant since I had graduated summa cum laude and maintained perfect conduct throughout my academic career. Mom interjected with cold efficiency, stating that my selfish focus on personal achievement rather than family unity demonstrated poor character. She claimed my academic success proved I could support myself independently, while Madison needed family resources due to her sensitive nature and artistic temperament. The legal documents spread before me contained transfer papers that would sign away my birthright to everything our family had built. My hands shook as I scanned the paperwork. The inheritance included not just money, but controlling shares in Morrison Properties, the vacation homes investment portfolios, and even my grandmother's jewelry collection that had been promised to me since childhood. Madison would receive everything while I would walk away with nothing except my education and whatever I could earn independently. When I protested, Dad's expression hardened. He reminded me that ungrateful children often found themselves completely cut off from family support. Mom added that smart daughters understood when to accept reality gracefully. Their words carried implicit threats wrapped in parental disappointment, suggesting that refusing to sign would result in total estrangement. Madison finally looked up from her phone, smirking as she watched my distress. She made a comment about how I had always been too intense and needed to learn when to step aside for family harmony. Her casual cruelty in that moment revealed something I had missed for years. She knew this was coming. Her relaxed demeanor suggested prior knowledge, possibly even collaboration in planning this ambush. The room fell silent except for the antique grandfather clock ticking ominously in the corner. I realized this meeting had been carefully orchestrated. The timing right after graduation, the legal documents prepared in advance, Madison's presence, despite her usual disinterest in family business discussions, everything pointed to premeditation. They had waited until I completed my expensive education before pulling the rug out from under me. As I stared at the signature lines waiting for my name, questions flooded my mind. Why now? Why this sudden shift in family dynamics? What had I done to deserve such betrayal from the people who claimed to love me unconditionally? The answers would prove more shocking than I could have imagined, but in that moment, I only felt the crushing weight of realizing my entire life had been built on lies. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. Without saying another word, I walked toward the study door, leaving the unsigned documents on the desk. Dad called after me, warning that I had 24 hours to reconsider before they took alternative measures to protect the family legacy. Mom added that hotel rooms were expensive, and I should think carefully about my next steps. Their final threats confirmed what my gut already knew. This was not about family unity or Madison's needs. Something darker was driving their desperation to strip away my inheritance immediately. I needed answers, and I needed them fast because 24 hours would determine whether I fought back or accepted defeat. That night, I drove aimlessly through Connecticut's winding back roads, my mind racing faster than my BMW could carry me. Every childhood memory felt contaminated by new understanding. Were their proud smiles at my spelling bee victories genuine, or were they already planning my eventual disposal? Had they ever truly loved me, or was I simply an investment they were now ready to liquidate? I checked into a modest hotel near Hartford, paying with my own credit card since I refused to use anything connected to Morrison Properties. The sterile room became my war room as I opened my laptop and began investigating my own family. If they could orchestrate such an elaborate betrayal, what else were they hiding? My first discovery came through social media deep dives. Madison had been posting expensive purchases for months. Designer handbags, luxury spa treatments, first-class flights to Europe, far beyond what her allowance should cover. Her recent Instagram stories showed her at exclusive events with people I did not recognize wearing jewelry that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Either my parents had been secretly funding her extravagant lifestyle, or she had income sources they had never mentioned. Next, I accessed public property records through databases I had learned to navigate during my business courses. What I found made my blood run cold. Over the past 18 months, my parents had been quietly liquidating assets. The lake house in Vermont, sold. The commercial properties in downtown Hartford, sold. Investment properties that had been in our family for decades, all sold to shell companies with names I did not recognize. But the most damning evidence came from incorporation records. 6 months ago, while I was completing my final semester, my parents had established Morrison Holdings, LLC. The filing listed James and Patricia Morrison as founding partners. But Madison Morrison held equal ownership shares despite never working a day in the family business. Meanwhile, my name appeared nowhere on any recent corporate documents. The pattern became clear. My parents had been systematically moving assets out of the original Morrison Properties structure and into this new entity where Madison held legal control. They had been planning my disinheritance long before that devastating family meeting. My graduation was not the trigger for their decision. It was simply the convenient moment they had been waiting for to execute a plan months in the making. I spent hours digging deeper into financial records that were publicly available. The more I discovered, the more questions arose. Why were they so desperate to complete this transfer immediately? What were they afraid I might discover if given more time? And most importantly, where was all the money from those asset sales actually going? My breakthrough came at 3 a.m. when I remembered my internship at a forensic accounting firm the previous summer. My supervisor had taught me techniques for tracking money trails through corporate structures. Using those skills, I began mapping the financial connections between Morrison Holdings and the shell companies that had purchased our family properties. The web of transactions led to a stunning revelation. The shell companies were not random buyers. They were all controlled by the same offshore entity registered in the Cayman Islands. Someone had been orchestrating a massive financial restructuring designed to move Morrison family wealth beyond the reach of traditional legal claims. But the corporate filings contained a fatal flaw that would become my weapon. Madison Morrison was listed as the beneficial owner of the Cayman Islands entity, but the incorporation date preceded her 21st birthday by 8 months. Under international banking law, minors cannot legally control offshore financial structures without court-appointed guardianship. This meant the entire arrangement violated multiple financial regulations, potentially constituting fraud on an international scale. I had found my leverage. My parents and Madison had been so focused on pushing me out that they had made critical legal errors. But I needed more than just regulatory violations to fight back effectively. I needed to understand their motivation for taking such enormous risks. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Check your email. A friend who has been watching." My heart pounded as I opened my laptop and found a message from someone identifying themselves only as a concerned observer. The email contained a single attachment: a photograph taken at a Hartford restaurant showing my father dining with a woman I had never seen before. But it was not the unknown woman that made me gasp. In the background of the photo, clearly visible at another table, sat Madison with a man who appeared to be at least 20 years older than her. They were holding hands across the table, their body language suggesting intimate familiarity. The timestamp showed the photo was taken just 2 weeks earlier, while I had been studying for final exams. Everything clicked into place. Madison's mysterious income, my parents' desperate timeline, the complex financial restructuring. It all revolved around relationships they had been keeping secret. But I still needed to understand who these people were and why their involvement necessitated my immediate removal from the family inheritance. The anonymous sender had included a note: "If you want the whole truth, meet me tomorrow at Riverside Park, Hartford, noon. Come alone. Bring your questions because I have answers that will change everything." I stared at the message until my eyes burned. Someone else knew about my family's secrets and was willing to help me uncover the truth. After 24 hours of feeling completely alone and betrayed, I finally had an ally. More importantly, I had a plan. I would meet this mysterious source and learn everything they knew about my family's hidden activities. Then I would use that information to expose their fraud and reclaim what was rightfully mine. My parents had taught me to be strategic and patient. Now I would use those lessons against them. But first, I needed to respond to their ultimatum in a way that bought me time without revealing my hand. I composed a carefully worded email expressing my willingness to discuss the family arrangements further and requesting a meeting later that week. It was vague enough to suggest compliance while giving me space to investigate. As dawn broke over Hartford, I finally allowed myself a few hours of sleep. Tomorrow would bring answers, but tonight had already brought something more valuable: hope that justice was still possible. The morning air carried an unseasonable chill as I arrived at Riverside Park 15 minutes early. My nerves stretched tight with anticipation. I had barely slept, alternating between studying the financial documents and rehearsing questions for my mysterious contact. Every jogger and dog walker looked suspicious as I claimed a bench with clear sightlines in multiple directions. At exactly noon, an elegantly dressed woman in her 50s approached my bench. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her navy business suit impeccable, but her eyes held the same haunted expression I had seen in my own mirror that morning. She introduced herself as Victoria Sterling, and within minutes she would shatter every remaining illusion I held about my family. Victoria was not just a concerned observer. She was my father's former business partner and Madison's biological mother. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Victoria explained that she and my father had built Morrison Properties together 25 years ago, combining her family's old money connections with his ambitious development strategies. Their business partnership had evolved into a romantic relationship, and Madison was their daughter. When Victoria became pregnant, my father was already married to my mother, but promised to leave his wife after I graduated from elementary school. He never did. Instead, James Morrison had systematically pushed Victoria out of their business empire while publicly maintaining his marriage for social appearances. He had used legal technicalities and financial manipulation to steal her shares in Morrison Properties, leaving her with minimal resources despite being equal creator of their success. Victoria had spent 15 years fighting through courts to recover what he had stolen, but my father's connections in Connecticut's legal community had repeatedly blocked her efforts. Madison had grown up knowing the truth about her parentage, but believing her father would eventually acknowledge her publicly and restore her mother's rightful position. Victoria had foolishly encouraged this hope, thinking that patience and loyalty would eventually be rewarded. Only recently had she discovered that James Morrison had been playing an even longer game than she realized. The offshore financial structures, the asset liquidations, the pressure to make me sign away my inheritance. It was all part of his exit strategy. My father planned to disappear with the Morrison family wealth, taking my mother and Madison to a country without extradition treaties. Victoria had hired private investigators who uncovered travel documents, foreign bank accounts, and a detailed timeline for their departure. But the timeline required my inheritance to be legally transferred first. Under my grandfather's original will, I held veto power over major asset sales until I officially received my inheritance on my 26th birthday. My signature on those transfer documents would eliminate that protection and allow them to liquidate everything without legal obstacles. Victoria reached into her designer handbag and withdrew a thick manila envelope. Inside were photographs, financial records, communication intercepts, and legal documents that painted a comprehensive picture of my father's decades-long fraud. She had been gathering evidence for years, waiting for the right moment to strike back. My disinheritance attempt had provided the final pieces she needed. The most damning evidence involved Madison's role in the scheme. Far from being an innocent pawn, she had been actively helping her father launder money through social media influence schemes and cryptocurrency investments. Her expensive lifestyle was funded by illegal offshore transfers that violated numerous financial regulations. She had also been secretly recording conversations with my mother, gathering blackmail material to ensure her compliance with their escape plan. Victoria's investigation had revealed that my mother, Patricia, was not a willing participant in this conspiracy. She had discovered my father's affair and Madison's true parentage only months earlier. James Morrison had threatened to frame her for tax evasion unless she cooperated with his disinheritance scheme. The legal documents I had seen at the family meeting included pre-signed divorce papers that would leave my mother financially destroyed if she refused to participate. As I absorbed these revelations, Victoria outlined her proposal for revenge. She wanted to coordinate our efforts to expose the entire conspiracy simultaneously. Her evidence would prove financial fraud and international money laundering, while my knowledge of family dynamics could help us predict their next moves. Together, we could ensure that justice was served before they escaped with stolen wealth. But Victoria warned me that moving against my father would require perfect timing and absolute secrecy. He still had powerful connections throughout Connecticut's business and political circles. If he suspected we were working together, he might accelerate his escape timeline or find ways to eliminate the evidence against him. We would have one opportunity to strike decisively. She handed me an encrypted phone and explained that we would communicate only through secure channels. My role would be to continue playing the confused, hurt daughter while secretly gathering additional evidence from inside the family. Victoria would coordinate with federal investigators who had been building cases against international money laundering networks. My father's scheme had grown large enough to attract attention from agencies with resources to pursue criminals across international borders. The most crucial element of our strategy involved Madison. Victoria believed her daughter could be turned against my father if she understood the full extent of his betrayal. Madison did not know about the planned departure or that my father intended to abandon Victoria permanently once their escape was complete. If we could show Madison proof of his true intentions, she might be willing to provide evidence that would destroy his entire operation. Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she described her hopes for reconciliation with Madison. Despite years of manipulation and lies, she still loved her daughter and wanted to save her from my father's corrupting influence. She believed Madison's participation in the fraud stemmed from desperation for paternal approval rather than genuine criminal intent. As our meeting concluded, Victoria gave me specific instructions for the coming days. I was to return home and express reluctant willingness to sign the inheritance transfer, but request additional time to review the legal implications. This would keep my father confident while giving us space to coordinate with law enforcement. Meanwhile, she would begin reaching out to Madison through intermediaries who could arrange a private meeting. Walking back to my car, I felt transformed. The helpless victim who had fled that family meeting had been replaced by a woman with purpose allies and a plan for justice. My father had taught me to be strategic and patient, but he had never imagined those skills would be turned against him. That evening, I called my parents and delivered an Academy Award-worthy performance of confused submission. I told them I understood their concerns about family unity and was willing to discuss the inheritance transfer, but needed to consult with independent legal advisors first. This was standard procedure for such significant financial decisions, and refusing would have seemed suspicious. My father's relief was audible through the phone. He assured me that taking time for proper legal review showed maturity and wisdom. He even offered to recommend attorneys who could expedite the process, though I politely declined and stated I preferred to find my own representation. As I prepared for the most challenging week of my life, I reflected on how completely my understanding of family loyalty had changed. True loyalty meant protecting innocent people from harm, not enabling criminal behavior. My real family consisted of people who supported my growth and respected my rights, not those who shared my DNA while plotting my destruction. The war for justice was about to begin, and I intended to win. 3 days later, everything exploded simultaneously across multiple fronts like a perfectly orchestrated symphony of justice that would haunt my father's nightmares forever. Victoria had worked her magic with Madison, arranging what appeared to be an accidental encounter at Madison's favorite upscale coffee shop in West Hartford. Armed with photographs of travel documents bearing only 3 names, James Patricia and someone called Maria Santos. With Madison's face but a false identity, Victoria finally showed her daughter the brutal truth. My father planned to abandon her mother permanently while using Madison as his criminal accomplice until she was no longer useful. The revelation shattered Madison's world. She had spent years believing she was Daddy's precious secret daughter, destined for eventual recognition and inheritance. Instead, she discovered she was merely a disposable tool in his escape strategy. The fake passport photographs showed Madison would be discarded the moment they reached their final destination, replaced by whatever new identity my father had purchased for his next phase of life. Madison's response exceeded every expectation Victoria had dared to harbor. Furious at being manipulated and terrified of facing criminal charges alone, she agreed to cooperate fully with federal investigators. More importantly, she had been secretly recording conversations with my father for months, originally planning to use them as leverage for better treatment within the family hierarchy. Now those recordings would provide evidence of conspiracy fraud and international money laundering. Meanwhile, I had been playing my role perfectly at home, expressing naive eagerness to expedite the inheritance transfer process. My father grew increasingly confident, even sharing details about their extended vacation plans that would begin immediately after the paperwork was completed. He had no idea that every conversation was being recorded through devices Victoria's investigators had helped me place throughout our house. The federal investigation had been moving faster than anyone anticipated. Victoria's evidence had connected my father's scheme to a broader network of offshore fraud that investigators had been tracking for years. When they realized James Morrison was preparing to flee the country within days, they accelerated their timeline and prepared for immediate arrests. My mother's role in this drama had become increasingly tragic as the truth emerged. Patricia Morrison was not a willing conspirator, but a terrorized victim who had been systematically isolated and threatened into compliance. My father had convinced her that refusing to cooperate would result in criminal charges that would destroy both her life and mine. She believed signing those documents was protecting me from his wrath. The morning everything unraveled began with a phone call to my father that I was not supposed to overhear. Madison was supposed to confirm final travel arrangements, but instead she delivered devastating news that federal agents had contacted her attorney. My father's voice cracked as he realized his perfect plan was collapsing, but he still believed he could salvage the situation by accelerating his departure timeline. Within hours, moving trucks appeared at our estate as my parents began frantically packing for what they claimed was an emergency business trip. My father insisted I sign the inheritance documents immediately before their departure, claiming it was necessary to protect family assets during their absence. His desperation was palpable, though he tried to maintain his authoritative facade. I had been expecting this moment and was ready with my response. Standing in that same mahogany study where my world had initially collapsed, I looked my father directly in his eyes and spoke the words Victoria and I had rehearsed. I know about Madison, I know about the offshore accounts, I know about your escape plan, and I know you are never coming back. The color drained from his face as he realized his deception had been discovered. But before he could respond, the sound of multiple vehicles arriving outside announced the arrival of federal agents with arrest warrants. Victoria had coordinated the timing perfectly, ensuring that my confrontation would prevent any last-minute escape attempts while law enforcement surrounded the property. My mother appeared in the study doorway, her face streaked with tears, but her expression showing relief rather than fear. She had known this moment was coming and had been secretly cooperating with investigators for weeks, providing evidence about my father's threats and manipulation. Her participation in the conspiracy had been coerced, and she was prepared to testify about years of psychological and financial abuse. As federal agents entered our home with search warrants, my father made one final, desperate attempt to maintain control. He threatened to destroy evidence and claimed that everyone else was lying about his activities. But Madison's recordings, Victoria's financial documentation, and my mother's testimony had already provided investigators with overwhelming proof of his crimes. The search of our property revealed evidence that exceeded even Victoria's suspicions. Hidden safes contained multiple false passports, foreign currency worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and detailed plans for establishing new identities in countries without extradition treaties. My father had been planning this escape for years, systematically stealing from business partners, clients, and family members to fund his new life. But the most shocking discovery came from Madison's cooperation with federal investigators. She revealed that my father had been manipulating multiple women across different states using the same pattern of business partnerships, romantic relationships, and financial theft. Victoria was not his only victim. There were at least 5 other women who had been systematically robbed and abandoned over the past 2 decades. As handcuffs closed around my father's wrists, he made one final plea to me. He claimed everything he had done was to protect the family legacy and ensure our financial security. His words rang hollow in the study where he had tried to steal my birthright just days earlier. The man I had once admired as a successful businessman was revealed as nothing more than a sophisticated criminal who had built his empire on lies and theft. Victoria arrived as my father was being loaded into a federal vehicle, her face showing a mixture of vindication and sadness. 25 years of legal battles and personal torment were finally ending, but the cost had been enormous. She had lost decades of her life to his manipulation, and her relationship with Madison would require years of healing. Madison appeared beside her mother for the first time in years, her usual arrogance replaced by genuine remorse and fear. She understood that her cooperation with investigators was the only thing standing between her and serious criminal charges. More importantly, she was beginning to comprehend how thoroughly her father had manipulated her entire worldview. As federal agents continued their search and neighbors gathered outside our gates, I realized this was not just the end of my father's criminal career. It was the beginning of our family's opportunity for genuine healing and honest relationships. The aftermath of my father's arrest created a media tsunami that dominated Connecticut news for weeks. Prominent real estate mogul arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme became the headline that destroyed the Morrison family reputation overnight. But for those of us who had lived with his lies, it felt like the first honest story ever told about our family. Federal agents spent 3 days cataloging evidence from our estate. They discovered financial records dating back 15 years, revealing the true scope of my father's criminal enterprise. The man who had lectured me about integrity and hard work had systematically defrauded business partners, clients, and government agencies of over $12 million. His sophisticated money laundering operation had funneled stolen wealth through dozens of shell companies, offshore accounts, and cryptocurrency exchanges. My mother's transformation during those chaotic days was remarkable to witness. Years of psychological manipulation had convinced her that she was helpless and dependent, but once my father's threats were eliminated, her natural strength reemerged. She worked closely with federal investigators, providing detailed testimony about his coercive tactics and helping them understand the full extent of his financial crimes. The most devastating revelation came when investigators traced the origins of Morrison Properties itself. My grandfather's original real estate business had been legitimate, but my father had been systematically stealing from it since the day he inherited control. The family wealth I had grown up believing was earned through honest work was actually built on decades of fraud, theft, and manipulation. Victoria and Madison's relationship became a fascinating study in healing and forgiveness. Madison had spent years resenting her mother for not fighting harder against my father's control, but now she understood the impossible position Victoria had faced. My father had threatened to destroy Madison's future if Victoria ever exposed their relationship or challenged his authority. Every choice Victoria made had been designed to protect her daughter from his retaliation. Madison's cooperation with federal investigators proved crucial to building cases against my father's network of criminal associates. Her recordings captured conversations that revealed connections to other fraud schemes, tax evasion operations, and international money laundering networks. She had unknowingly documented evidence that would help prosecutors pursue dozens of additional criminals. The legal proceedings moved with surprising speed once federal authorities understood the international scope of my father's activities. His attempted flight from the country, combined with overwhelming evidence of ongoing criminal activity, meant bail was denied immediately. He would remain in federal custody while prosecutors built cases that could result in decades of prison time. Our family estate became the center of complex asset forfeiture proceedings as investigators worked to trace stolen funds and return money to victims. The mansion luxury vehicles, artwork, and investment portfolios would all be liquidated to compensate the people my father had defrauded over the years. Victoria would finally receive restitution for the business partnership he had stolen from her decades earlier. But the emotional healing proved more challenging than the legal resolution. My relationship with Madison evolved slowly as we both processed the truth about our upbringing. She had grown up knowing she was the secret daughter, but believing this made her special and chosen. I had grown up as the acknowledged daughter, but never understanding that my father viewed me as a disposable obstacle to his criminal plans. The inheritance documents that had started this entire ordeal became worthless overnight. Federal asset forfeiture meant there would be no Morrison family wealth to inherit. But somehow this felt like justice rather than loss. My father's money had always been stolen from others, and returning it to rightful owners felt more honorable than claiming it for ourselves. Victoria's vindication after 25 years of legal battles was profound to witness. Courts had repeatedly dismissed her claims against my father, partly due to his political connections, and partly because the complexity of his financial crimes had not been fully understood. Now federal investigators confirmed that every allegation she had made was accurate and likely understated the true extent of his criminal behavior. My mother's financial situation required careful navigation since she had been both victim and unwilling accomplice. Federal prosecutors recognized that her participation had been coerced, but untangling her legal responsibility from my father's crimes required months of detailed investigation. Victoria's testimony about witnessing my father's threats against my mother proved crucial to establishing her victim status. The media attention brought unexpected allies as other victims of my father's schemes came forward. Women from across New England contacted investigators with similar stories of business partnerships that ended in financial theft, romantic relationships used for manipulation, and systematic campaigns of psychological abuse designed to maintain control over their assets and silence. Madison's future remained uncertain as prosecutors determined whether to file charges related to her money laundering activities. Her cooperation with investigators and evidence of her father's manipulation worked in her favor, but she had participated in criminal activities as an adult and would face consequences for those choices. The scared, angry young woman who had smirked at my distress during that family meeting was gone, replaced by someone who understood the real cost of my father's criminal empire. As winter settled over Connecticut, our family began the long process of rebuilding relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. Victoria moved into a modest apartment near Hartford, finally free from decades of legal battles and financial stress. Madison stayed with her mother while working with counselors to process years of psychological manipulation and make amends for her role in my father's crimes. My mother and I found ourselves living together in a small rental house, learning to relate to each other without my father's controlling presence. She had spent 25 years walking on eggshells, anticipating his moods and managing his expectations. Now she was discovering her own preferences, opinions, and dreams for the first time since her early 20s. The federal investigation continued expanding as prosecutors followed money trails that led to criminal networks across multiple states and countries. My father's cooperation was non-existent. He maintained his innocence despite overwhelming evidence and refused to provide information that might help investigators recover additional stolen funds. But his silence could not stop the momentum of justice that had been building for decades. Victoria's patient gathering of evidence, Madison's recordings, my mother's testimony, and my own role in exposing his escape plan had created an unstoppable legal reckoning. As spring approached, we prepared for trials that would determine my father's fate and provide final closure for his many victims. The man who had once seemed all-powerful was facing the consequences of choices that had harmed countless people over decades. 18 months after that devastating family meeting, I stood in a federal courthouse watching my father receive a sentence of 32 years in prison for fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy charges that spanned multiple decades. The judge's words about the sophisticated and callous nature of the defendant's crimes echoed through the courtroom, but I felt only relief that his ability to harm others had finally ended. The trial had revealed the full scope of his criminal enterprise. Prosecutors documented systematic theft from 17 different business partners, elaborate schemes that defrauded government agencies of millions in tax revenue, and a network of shell companies designed to hide assets stolen from victims across multiple states. My father's defense attorneys had argued he was simply an aggressive businessman, but federal investigators had traced his criminal activities back 23 years. Victoria received complete vindication as the court formally recognized that my father had defrauded her of her rightful share in Morrison Properties. The business empire she had helped build was restored to her control, along with substantial financial compensation for decades of stolen profits. At 56, she was rebuilding her life with resources and legal protection that my father could never again threaten. Madison's cooperation with federal investigators had earned her a plea agreement that avoided prison time in exchange for 3 years of supervised probation and community service. She was also required to complete extensive counseling to address the psychological manipulation she had endured and the criminal behavior she had learned from our father. Her testimony had been crucial to convicting several of his criminal associates who might otherwise have escaped justice. My mother's journey toward healing had been remarkable to witness. Federal prosecutors had determined that her participation in my father's schemes had been entirely coercive, making her a victim rather than a criminal accomplice. She was pursuing therapy to address decades of psychological abuse while slowly rediscovering the confident, independent woman she had been before my father's manipulation began. The asset forfeiture proceedings had liquidated everything connected to my father's crimes, but the restitution process ensured that stolen funds were returned to rightful owners. Victoria's settlement provided her with financial security, while other victims received compensation that helped rebuild lives my father had destroyed. Even our family home was sold with proceeds distributed among his victims according to court orders. My own life had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated. The MBA that my father had dismissed as selfish academic pursuit became the foundation for a forensic accounting career, specializing in financial fraud investigations. Federal agencies had offered me consulting positions based on my role in exposing my father's crimes, and I was building expertise that would help other families escape similar situations. But the most profound changes involved the relationships I had rebuilt from the ashes of my father's deception. Victoria and I had developed a genuine friendship based on shared experiences and mutual respect rather than the family obligations that had previously defined my relationships. She mentored my transition into forensic accounting while I helped her reconnect with business networks that my father's reputation had damaged. Madison and my relationship remained complicated, but we were both committed to honest communication about our shared trauma. She was working to rebuild her life without the criminal income and manipulative relationships that had previously defined her world. Our conversations were often difficult, but they were real, in ways that family interactions had never been during my father's reign of control. My mother and I were learning to be friends as well as family. Without my father's constant manipulation and threats, she was rediscovering interests and opinions that had been suppressed for decades. She enrolled in college courses, pursued volunteer work with domestic violence organizations, and began dating someone who treated her with kindness and respect. The chosen family I had assembled felt more authentic than the biological relationships that had been corrupted by my father's criminal enterprise. Victoria's unwavering support during my darkest moments had proven that loyalty was earned through actions rather than inherited through genetics. Madison's willingness to face consequences for her mistakes showed growth that blood relation alone could never guarantee. Professional success had followed naturally from the skills I developed during our family crisis. My forensic accounting practice specialized in cases involving family fraud, helping other victims navigate the complex legal and emotional challenges of exposing financial crimes committed by trusted relatives. Every case reminded me that courage to seek truth was often the first step toward justice. The federal prosecutors who had pursued my father's case became mentors who helped me understand how financial crimes devastated families and communities. Their dedication to protecting vulnerable people from sophisticated criminals inspired my own commitment to using my education and experience in service of justice rather than personal advancement. My father had written several letters from federal prison attempting to justify his actions and requesting family visits. None of us had responded to his communications or accepted his attempts at contact. The man who had once dominated our lives through fear and manipulation now possessed no power over our choices or our healing. The house where that terrible family meeting had occurred was purchased by a young family with small children whose laughter now filled rooms that had once echoed with threats and deception. Driving past occasionally, I felt grateful that the building's dark history was being replaced with genuine family love and honest relationships. As I reflected on everything that had transpired, I realized my father had inadvertently taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. True family was not defined by shared DNA or legal documents, but by people who supported your growth, respected your autonomy, and stood beside you when facing challenges. The inheritance he had tried to steal was replaced by something far more valuable: authentic relationships built on trust and mutual respect. Now, I want to hear from all of you who have survived family betrayal and fought back against injustice. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was manipulating you for their own gain? Did you find the courage to expose the truth, even when it meant losing relationships you thought mattered? Drop your stories in the comments because your experiences might help someone else recognize manipulation before it destroys their life. If this story of family vengeance and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button to help other people find hope when facing similar betrayals. Subscribe for more true stories about ordinary people who refused to accept unfair treatment and fought back against those who tried to silence them. Share this video with anyone who needs encouragement to stand up for themselves, because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is refuse to be victims. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to vindication. Remember that blood may determine genetics, but character determines family. The people who truly love you will never ask you to sacrifice your dignity or surrender your rights for their convenience. Trust your instincts, document everything, and never underestimate the power of patience combined with strategic action. Here is wishing all of you the courage to seek truth, the strength to demand justice, and the wisdom to build authentic relationships that honor your worth. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let someone else's crimes define your future.